If you enjoy Jerusalem Unplugged, you may also like to listen to Stories from Palestine podcast. My name is Crystal. I'm originally from the Netherlands. I am married to a Palestinian and I live in Beit Safafa between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. I studied history and tour guiding and I produce a weekly podcast called Stories from Palestine. You can find it on your favorite podcast player or go to the website storiesfrompalestine.info.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jerusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. I'm your host, Roberto Mazza, and today it's with great pleasure that I have two guests, not only one, Faisal Saleh and Nancy Nesvet. Faisal is the founder and director of the Palestine Museum US, and with him we're going to extensively talk about the museum, its activities and exhibitions. And Nancy is the curator of the current exhibitions that is possible to visit in Venice, Palestine with Art. Now, before we are delving into the questions, I would also extend my thanks to Isabella Chiadini. Isabella is a regular listener of the podcast, and she got in touch with me, and eventually she managed to send me the contacts and organize this episode. So, Isabella, thank you so much. And I hope you will enjoy, together with all of the other listeners, this podcast. Now, the first question I want to ask both of you is if you can tell us a little bit more about your background and how did you decide to establish the Palestine Museum for you, Faisal, and how did you get into the exhibition in Venice for Nancy?
Well, thank you. Just a bit of background about myself. I was born in the town of Albira, which is part of the Twin City of Ramallah, in 1951. My family was a refugee family that lost their home in a village called Selama, which is 5 kilometers east of Jaffa, in 1948, and I was the 11th child for that family. I grew up in the West Bank and attended public schools there, and I came to the US to finish the last year of my high school in 1969. After attending high school and college, I proceeded to work in business and did a lot of entrepreneurial work, and after over 40 years of working in the business world, I realized I haven't done anything for Palestine. And as you know, every Palestinian yearns to serve Palestine in any way possible. And as I looked around and I talked to some people and got involved in some activities, it became clear to me that we have no museums in the Western Hemisphere at the time, at least. And it was really a great opportunity to introduce Palestinian art to the Western world and create the first Palestinian museum in the Western Hemisphere. So that's how the Palestine Museum came to exist. And that's my background and how I got there.
So how we got into the Venice Biennale and about the exhibit. I'm Nancy Nesvet, and thank you so much, Roberto, for having us on the podcast today. Once I became head curator of the Palestine Museum US, I was looking for opportunities to announce to the world how good Palestinian artists were, which is exactly what Faisal's mission is, to show the world the expertise of Palestinian artists. So when I'd been there about 6 months, I said to him, we should be in the Venice Biennale. And he, after a little hesitation, perhaps, assented. And we were off on the journey. And the journey was very complicated. I wrote a 26-page application, and we had to be very, very exact about how we were going to do the exhibit, what was in it, the artists, their bios, and the work itself. And some of the work was not yet created. So we had very little time to contact the artists and say, would you like to make a new work for this? No work that had been in any exhibition before was allowed to be in our exhibition at the Venice Biennale. So we put together a show, and we went to the third floor of the building that Faisal museum is in, which was empty of furniture and stuff. And we literally laid out the exhibit exactly as it would be in this room. And then all the elevations and floor plans went in, and we quaked and wondered what was going to happen. We should mention that we had to apply as a collateral exhibit at the Venice Biennale. There are three ways that people can apply to be an official part of the Venice Biennale. The first is a cadre of artists that's specifically picked by Cecilia Alemany, the curator of the entire Biennale, and they have single solo shows, right, within the Arsenale, which is the venue of the Venice Biennale. The second way that you're chosen, or rather included, is as a national pavilion. We did pursue that, but Palestine is not considered a nation by Italy and doesn't have an embassy in Italy. And those are the parameters for qualifying as a national exhibition. So we were left to apply as a collateral exhibition, which means an exhibition that's sponsored by organizations, that is not sponsored by a nation or that's represented in Italy, okay, and is very often held off-site in beautiful venues like ours at Palazzo Mora. So we put in our application, and we were delighted, absolutely, that Cecilia Alemany, who handpicks all of the collateral exhibitions by herself with no one else's interaction, chose us, perhaps because of the importance of including a Palestinian exhibition within the Biennale, and hopefully because she saw the work that we were going to exhibit and thought that it was absolutely beautiful and meritorious of the work exhibited at the Venice Biennale. I do want to mention that, that we got calls constantly from the people at Palazzo Mora, where we were going to have the exhibition. Rennie there was calling weekly and saying, did you get in? Did you get in? So he was the first call after Faisal called me to tell that we had been admitted to the exhibition. And we were off. And we got the work there in rather unorthodox ways, hand carrying a lot of it on a plane as hand luggage, rolled up and put in telescopic cases. That was Faisal's idea, and I will tell him that it was totally brilliant. And then he rented a big Volvo car when we got to Milan, and took it directly to the framer, where it was restretched and framed. We had the photographs redone at an excellent facility in Italy. And then they went to the framer directly and got delivered to Palazzo Mora. So we did avoid a lot of the exigencies of other people who had shipping difficulties at the Biennale. And that was all due to Faisal's rather unorthodox but brilliant approach to putting the show together and getting the work done. So I applaud him for that. Mm-hmm.
Nancy, I think we should also point out that there were only 30 collateral events selected. So we were one of those 30. And at Palazzo Mora, the venue of our exhibit, we are the only official Biennale exhibit out of over 100 exhibits in that venue.
Well, the only thing I feel like to say now is Mubruk, congratulations. I mean, the way it happened. And of course, I believe what is important is to have this kind of visibility given the world stage that the Biennale in Venice provides to all of the artists, and, the possibility to be admired by just regular people walking by Venice, visiting Venice, and who normally go around the city, and just have this possibility to visit all of these exhibitions. I want to go back to the museum and Faisal and asking you something about the choice made to open a museum in the US. You mentioned that you realized there were no Palestinian museums in the Western world, certainly in America. And so I was wondering, why do you think it was important to tell a Palestinian story through the arts and not other means?
As you know, there are a lot of people who are trying to tell the Palestinian story through other means. There are a lot of political organizations, organizations that advocates for Palestinian rights, and a lot of human rights advocacies also, and a lot of people are engaged in a lot of efforts on behalf of the Palestine. And that field is really very crowded, and there's quite a few people in it. However, the art field was basically empty, virtually empty, and a vacuum existed. And I am not an art. I don't have an art background. I was basically a business person, and but as I saw the opportunity there, I felt that using the arts is a more effective way to tell our story, because art speaks to the heart, politics speaks to the mind, and as you know, the heart has the bigger influence on people. If you get people's hearts, the minds will follow. And in the United States, Palestine is not a very well-known item. And unfortunately, for those who know about Palestine, have absorbed a lot of the negative narrative that Israel and its friends have been perpetuating in the not just in the United States but also in the Western world. So our job is to really educate the American public and the Western public in general about Palestine, its history, its people, and to debunk many of the myths that they were spread around by the enemies of Palestine. And I'm happy to give you examples of those if you want.
Yes, I was going to ask you, in fact, out of curiosity, what do you think, the general American audience does not know about Palestine, and what you think, Americans should know about Palestine and Palestinians?
Yes. It's not unusual for the American audience, American public, not to know something about a foreign country. In general, most Americans are really not focused on events abroad. They're mostly absorbed by what goes on in the United States, and only occasionally when something flares up, like when there was a war in Afghanistan, when you see the Ukraine, for instance, that their attention is attracted temporarily for a short period of time. So it is it's an effort to attract the attention to things that are happening abroad. So the kind of things we would like Americans to know about is, first of all, we would like to undo the things that they've learned about from the mainstream media that basically reflects and magnifies the Israeli narrative, and the Western mainstream media focuses on violence and basically portrays Palestinians in a negative light, make us all look like terrorists, and things like that. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So what we want the Americans to know about is that Palestinians are humans. We have artists who excel in the arts, just like any other nation. And there are some facts that were misrepresented about Palestine. That such examples of that would be like when Israel was created, that Palestine was a desert, and the Jewish immigration to Palestine and the Zionism made the desert bloom, and there was no such thing as Palestine, and all these kind of lies that that they were spread. And we want Americans to know that there was Palestine, and it was a vibrant society, and there were a lot of people in Palestine to the tune of close to 1 million people. And they had their cultural institutions, they had theaters, they had music, they had art, poetry, literature, a thriving journalism. And we have been featuring all these things through films and through other kind of activities, and covering things that were going on from 1900 to 1948 when Israel was established, to debunk that story that Palestine was empty and it had nothing there and there were no such thing as Palestinians. We still, till today, experience a significant number of what we call Palestine deniers. And the Palestine deniers are the people who got their brains washed and believe the myth that there was no such thing as Palestine. Right now, there's probably about 10 million Palestinians at least, and they're all around the world. They're in the West Bank, they're inside the 1948 Palestine, they're in Gaza, they're in refugee camps in Jordan, in Syria, and in Lebanon, and throughout the exile. So our job as a museum is really to showcase the artwork that's being produced by those people. And the artwork is not necessarily political. I mean, if you look through our exhibits, you'll be hard pressed in finding anything political. The only reason you see the flag behind me is because in Jerusalem, people are banned from raising the Palestinian flag. And you can go to prison for years for displaying a Palestinian flag, and you can be arrested on the spot and beaten up with clubs on your head and on your arms and things for simply having a Palestinian flag on your person and showing it. So we, for the first time in 4 years, we have displaying a Palestinian flag simply to support the people who in Jerusalem who wanted to raise these flags and who are unable to, and we are raising these flags on their behalf.
Roberto, if I may, just to emphasize that, conceding that all art is political, whether we admit it or not, and also conceding that the film series run by the museum every Saturday at noon Eastern Standard Time US and Eastern Daylight Time US, which is 7:00 p.m. Palestine time. A lot of the films are necessarily have a political bent, all right? But when we exhibited in Venice and to a great degree at the museum, the art is not specifically political, all right? There are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, film is a much more extended time for you to see it. You get much less time to be confronted with artwork that's only a visual work, a still visual work in front of you, whether a photograph or a painting. All right, so you need to get the message that that work is sending out immediately. And to a degree, you need to get that empathic response to the work that's in front of you as well. All right, So when I created this exhibition, there was a purposeful curatory initiative here. And what that was not to show the violence at all. We see that in the news every day. And whereas we see it in the news and you, to a degree, get jaded seeing it day after day after day, and you're not really paying attention to it anyway. And we were having people of various ages at the exhibit. And there is some work where I would not want a young child to be confronted with it. Okay. But much more, there was a purpose to this, that all the work, whether landscape work or work of depicting people in the exhibit, shows the beauty of Palestine's land and people. In addition to that, we have a map on the floor that is a material that literally is stuck to the floor and you can walk on and are encouraged to, by Salman Sita. And he's a cartographer who's published a number of books about Palestine. He's also the president of the Palestine Land Society and founder of it. All right. And what that map is an 1877 map of Palestine with all the Arabic names still there of all the towns that have since been changed into generally Hebrew names. So it's, number one, evidence that there were people that were living in these towns. These towns existed as far back as the end of the Ottoman Empire. And now they still exist, but with different names. And we encouraged people to walk on it. And if they were from Palestine or their genealogy was, to find the town that their people came from and literally bend down, look at it, etc. And they did.
Nancy, excuse me. One thing we should point out about the map also, in addition to what you said, is that the map shows about 500 villages and towns that Israel has destroyed and totally erased off the map, off the current maps. And those 500 villages are present and exist on that map from 1877. So we are pointing that out to people, that despite Israel's erasure of these communities and villages, they still exist as far as Palestinians are concerned, and they are on that map.
Yeah.
I wanted to just go back to the museum, Roberto, and finish talking about what is the mission of the museum. And we talked about telling the Palestinian story through the arts. And the museum has two audiences, basically. It has the audience that's made up of the Western world and other people around the world. And also it has the Palestinians as an audience. The Palestinians, of course, is a very important audience. And our mission there really is to strengthen and enhance the Palestinian identity. The Palestinian identity is under attack by the enemies of Palestine, and they are trying, as we mentioned earlier, to erase Palestinians. And by emphasizing the Palestinian nature of the art that we're exhibiting and creating a Palestinian museum in the middle of the United States, we are giving Palestinians something to celebrate and to make them feel pride in a Palestinian institution that did not exist before. And as Palestinians visit the Palestine Museum or walk into the exhibition at the Venice Biennale, they're overcome with emotion. They feel for the first time they are walking into a place of their own. For years and years, we walked into other people's museums. Every museum we went to was somebody else's museum. But so now, for the first time, we can walk into our own museum and be very proud of the fact that this is a Palestinian institution, and this is another institution that proves our existence, enhances it, and reminds us of our Palestinian identity.
And to this point, I want to ask you something about the exhibitions. Just to give a sense to the listeners, you know, what kind of material is exhibited at the museums? Who are the artists, and if you can tell us something about their work, and how do they interact also with the museum and with the visitors of the museum?
Yeah, let me provide an introduction and then I'll turn it over to Nancy to talk about the specifics of the artwork. But the Palestine Museum is a unique museum. We're not like other museums because we have a unique mission and a unique purpose. So the museum really strives to represent as many Palestinian artists as possible across the board from different geographies, different styles of art, different demographics, if you will. And it also it exhibits things besides the typical artwork you see at a museum. We have a lot of artifacts. We have pots and pans that they were used in Palestine in the 30s and 40s and 50s. We have burners that people used for cooking and heating water for dozens of years before electricity was there and before gas was there. And we have a lot of things that described the way of life that existed in Palestine in the early part of the 20th century and in the mid part of the century. We also have embroidery, which is a very important Palestinian symbol. We have a lot of embroidery pieces and full thobes on mannequins and things of that sort. We have maps, we have stamps, we have almost a full coin collection from Palestine from 1926 through 1946, which is the period during which the British mandate had minted coins to be used in Palestine. So there are historic photographs. There are so much things. So when people come to the museum, the first thing that they remark about is, "My God, this is a lot bigger than we thought. We didn't think it was going to be anything like that." And they're awed by the spread and the range of things they see and the actual physical space, which is 6,500 square feet of space. As they enter the function room, which holds 150 people, they think that's the entire museum. But as they walk into a side door into the rest of the museum, then they're really shocked to see that there's a whole big space there besides just the room that they entered into. So I'll let Nancy talk a bit more about the artists and how we work with them and the nature of the art and the type of the art.
Thank you, Roberto. So, as I was saying, in the exhibition, specifically in Venice, the mantra was to show the beauty of the people in photographs and in paintings, and the beauty of the landscape, again, in paintings and photographs of Palestine, so that people would walk out of there and the message that I hope they would get is, we cannot destroy this land, we cannot see it destroyed. Okay, which harks back to the news that's coming out, but in a very artistic, empathic way. All right. So that's number one. And I did want them to stand in front of the photographs and the paintings and see these people and empathize with them and with their situation to a great degree. All right. So the museum itself has an inordinate amount of works. I think about 300 works that it owns and constantly displays, as well as having things in the museum in Connecticut. We've also staged exhibitions in Washington, D.C., in 3 different galleries there. We've also had other exhibitions around the world as well as Venice, and continue to do so. We also have this film series that I mentioned every Saturday noon Eastern US time. That is absolutely free. All you have to do is go to the website, www.palestinemuseum.us, And what you do is you click on events if you want to see the films or anything else, and register, and you will be sent a Zoom link so that you can see the film itself. And there's always a Q&A afterwards with either the director of the film, the producer, actors who are in it. And that goes on for upwards of an hour with the people who are watching it, sending in questions and getting them answered, as well as comments. And we generally have about 150, 200 people watching each film. So that's great.
And Nancy,
Yeah.
they come from about 30 countries usually.
They do. And then we also have a series that we do on some Sundays. At this point, we were doing it a lot more during the pandemic when people couldn't visit the museum. But we've had everyone that's involved with Palestinian culture somehow on the show. We've had chefs, authors, poets, people who wrote books, literature. We've had a lot of artists, filmmakers, portrait artists, sculptors, painters, photographers. We've had academics, we've had politicians, we've had people who are journalists who write for publications, including Haaretz. We've had a number of people having very, very interesting creatives talks, because when I think of them, rather than saying it's artist talks, it's creatives who aim to make a better world. And they belong.
I should point out, Nancy, that the museum has identified 12 categories of art that we as an institution follow and feature. And Nancy mentioned a good number of those. Maybe she didn't mention dance, maybe music, and she mentioned the culinary arts. We celebrate all these arts, and we feature those arts in everything we do, not just on the virtual programming, but also in the museum itself. So we are not really limited to visual arts per se.
Yes, as a matter of fact, a lot of what we've done lately is music, that we've had concerts featuring opera singers, violin trios, string trios, etc. One of them was at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, which was a really, really beautiful venue that hosted an oud band, who headed up by Ronnie Malley, who actually lives in Chicago, near where you are, Roberto, and who traveled to San Francisco to do that concert, which was wildly popular. So we continue to do a number of music venues. At our opening ceremony and dinner in Venice, we actually had a wonderful opera singer who did Palestinian songs as well as Italian opera. So we continue to engage in all of the arts. And that's why Venice was such an important project for us, because it literally put Palestine on the world stage, on the world artistic stage, that a lot of people now realize how good Palestinian art is across the board, all of the arts. And as I understand it, I have not corroborated this, but we're getting from 500 to 800 people a day at our exhibition in Venice.
Actually, Nancy, we're averaging 100 visitors per hour at the exhibit in Venice. There's also a sign outside of the Palazzo Mora building on the street, on one of the streets of Venice, that advertises our exhibit as an official Biennale collateral event exhibit with the red Biennale lion logo, that people passing by see it and get very curious, and they go through the gate and come in to see the exhibit. And fortunately, all the exhibits at the Palazzo Mora, including ours, are free of charge. They can visit the entire building with all its exhibits for free. They don't have to have tickets. They can just drop in as they walk by the building. But I wanted to just point out a few things about the Venice Biennale, in addition to what Nancy has described, is when we figured out what we really want to convey in that Biennale, we wanted to make sure that the important Palestinian symbols are fully incorporated in a big way at that exhibit. And one of those symbols you see in the map, and the map shows Palestine from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea is a very important Palestinian principle, that Palestinians consider Palestine to be from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, and they are not willing to give up on any inch of that land, and that's a very important Palestinian symbol that is strongly displayed and featured. You will also see that we at Nancy's creative suggestion featured a live olive tree, which is, olive trees are an important Palestinian symbol, because the olive tree lives for a long time. There are trees in Palestine that are over 2,000 or 3,000 years old that still exist. And those olive trees also have another symbol attached to them, which are keys from Palestinian homes that refugees in 1948 locked up their doors and took those keys with them, hoping or thinking they're going to come back in a month or two and go back to their homes and unlock them with those keys. Those keys exist 74 years after the people lost their homes, and these represent a very important symbol. It's the symbol of the right of return, the right of Palestinian refugees to return their homes. That right has not been given up by any Palestinian, and Palestinians cling to that right, and that right is on full display with those keys at the Venice Biennale also. So we also see another important symbol, which is the embroidery symbol that reflects each village's motifs and style of embroidery. And that the embroidery is a very important Palestinian tradition. There could be as well other symbols there that I didn't mention, but as you walk into the exhibit hall, people are awed by at least one of the images there of a 3-meter Nabil Anani landscape of Palestine. That's a mesmerizing view of Palestine that exists nowhere else. We've seen people walk in there and cry as they enter because of the impact, the emotional impact they feel. And some of those people are not even Palestinian in some cases.
Yes, I do want to add just a couple of things. That yes, we did exhibit 2 antique tobes, which is the robe that Palestinian women wear, that are embroidered with the symbols of the place that tobe originated at. All right, but directly opposite that, and covering the entrance to the room, which is 9 feet high, the entranceway, is not an embroidery, but a printed fabric of embroidery that looks like a tobe covering the door. And that was created by an artist named Samar Husseini. All right. And the point is that these antique tobes are directly facing this contemporary treatment of a tobe, announcing that even though the antique ones are 100 years old, we go on and we're still entering under the mantle of an embroidered tobe going into the Palestine exhibit. As far as the Nabil Anani, most beautiful painting that again is several meters, as Faisal said, that you're looking directly at when you enter the room. It's flanked on both sides by 2 paintings that are smaller, that are painted by Taki Sabatin. And one of them is a gorgeous Palestinian landscape with the sun rising over it. And when you go close, you can see the electric wires that have marred the landscape, the contemporary that's come into what was, and possibly destroyed the beauty of the hills that it depicts. So there are subtle signs of contemporary Palestine against old Palestine throughout the exhibit. There's a beautiful photograph of a woman selling figs, and she's doing that from her own trees that were planted possibly 100 years ago and still thriving, and bringing them to market to support herself as a woman in contemporary society. At the same time, there's a beautiful painting of a salt worker. A salt worker is an occupation that's on the low end of the economic scale, that's usually held by women, and is one of the hardest occupations you can imagine, literally extracting salt from water that people are raking through every single day, blistering in the sun. So we have that kind of thing going along, but we also have a painting of a loving couple in Palestine. We have gorgeous landscapes, a number of other things. So we're bringing a plethora of art from Palestine to literally an international stage, so everybody can see how beautiful it is and how meritorious the artists are.
Nancy, I know Roberto would be interested in knowing that we do have artists from Jerusalem featured in the exhibit. So one of those artists is Namir Qasim. She has a painting titled Enough. Also, Rula Halawani is a photographer, Palestinian photographer based in Jerusalem. And she also have a photograph featuring a landscape that has been interrupted by the building of Israeli settlements on it, destroying the serene look of that environment. And finally, Taki Sabatin is from the Jerusalem area, could be like maybe Bethlehem, Jerusalem. And he's the artist that Nancy has alluded to a few minutes ago.
You are indeed the perfect guest. You anticipated all of my questions. And I just wanted to say that I also found the title of the exhibition in Venice extremely brilliant, From Palestine with Art, obviously picking up from another one. But I was wondering something a little bit more political. And I know that you are, in your mission, you're trying to stay away from politics. But given the current events in Palestine, in Jerusalem in particular, I was wondering if you ran into any political issue while you were preparing the exhibition for Venice, and while actually the exhibition is unfolding in Venice as of now.
Well, first of all, let me comment about the name From Palestine with Art. Originally, we used a different name, but that name somehow coincided with another exhibit that we've had. And the people at the Biennale pointed that out and said that's not acceptable. So we had basically, Nancy and I had about an hour to come up with an alternate name. And we kicked that around, and we ended up with we didn't want to use From Palestine with Love, because that's really a bit overused. So we thought From Palestine with Art will be unique. And the emphasis in that title is on the preposition from. From means there is a physical place where this is from. And that physical place is Palestine, and therefore Palestine exists. So in a very subtle way, that's a very strong testimony to the existence of Palestine. And as that title was accepted by the Venice Biennale, it's a great validation, at least we think so, of our belief that Palestine exists, and we want people to know that it does exist. So that's what the name is all about. Now, as far as any oppositions, we experienced none whatsoever. And in Italy, we've worked with a lot of people in different cities. We used a printing company in one city. We used framers in one. We used photo printers. We've dealt with a lot of people, and we have a lot of friends from Italy who are supporting us. We experienced nothing whatsoever. The only thing noteworthy is that maybe a couple weeks ago we had a report from the people that managed the entry into the Palazzo Mora. They said that there was a woman from England came, looked at the exhibit and came out and was yelling at them, how could you do that? How do you let them do this? There's no such thing as Palestine. There's no Palestinians, etc. And all we could think of, that's a great validation for what we're doing. And if we solicit that reaction, that means we're really having an impact. And we see that as a sign of success of our message, and the message is being delivered. And some people are not comfortable with that message that challenges years of brainwashing that they've been undergoing. So we think that is very successful. And in the US also, the museum has experienced none whatsoever, no pushback from anybody, no attacks or no threats of any kind, because we are a museum. We are exhibiting art, and we're telling a story through the arts. And nobody has any grounds for attacking that. We're not yelling political slogans and accusing people of things. We're only touting the steadfastness of Palestinians, and we're showcasing Palestinian art, and that is not a threat to anybody, at least anybody who is not doing anything wrong.
Yes, Roberto, we might point out also that it's very difficult to create fake news when you're not using words, but instead you're using photographs. So
I was asking
like
that question very much because of the, as an Italian myself, I noticed that in the past 20, maybe 30 years, there's been some sort of a shift where Italy, I would say, traditionally positioned itself as a country, looking with favor at the Palestinian cause, from all politicians, from the right to the left. But as I said, in the last 20 to 30 years, there's been a shift, and the Palestinian question has become more controversial, and in fact, more political parties and members of various political parties have adopted a different stance on the question. Now, of course, Italy did not reach Germany in a sense of adopting anti-BDS or specific, definition of, the Palestinian cause and so forth, to create sort of political issues and problems with that. But I was just curious because, again, as you mentioned, given that Venice is also an international city with visitors from around the world, I was curious if, there were being cases, as you already mentioned, that would elicit some sort of response from the visitors.
Yeah. I mean, we have not seen any, and it could be due to our very clear and strong message that we are delivering. Anybody who wants to challenge what we're doing, bring it on. We are ready to answer that, because we're convinced of what we're doing, and we are not doing anything wrong in any way. We are showing art, and we appreciate countries that allow for freedom of expression, particularly freedom of artistic expression, and we condemn the countries that abridge that freedom and constrict the freedom of artistic expression. And we are concerned that Germany may be quickly turning into one of those countries. And the events that happened recently at the Documenta really make it clear that there is some attempts at restricting artistic freedom of expression, and we definitely condemn that in a very strong way. And we really call upon the proper authorities there to prosecute the people who perpetrated these crimes of defacing artwork and issuing threats against artists. And we hope that those acts, those heinous acts, were perpetrated by some people, will not go unpunished or unchecked.
I have just a couple more questions or so before at the end of our conversation. And Faisal, I would like to go back to the museum, and if you can tell us and tell the listeners a little bit more about the practicalities, how to visit, where the museum is located, and how the museum is also interacting perhaps virtually with the rest of the world.
Sure. First of all, the museum's website, as we mentioned earlier, is palestinemuseum.us. So you can reach the website, and from the website you can get more information. You can buy books and buy other artifacts and some artwork that's available there as well. And you can sign up for events, etc. The physical museum is located in a small town called Woodbridge outside of New Haven, Connecticut. And it is 2 hours by train from New York City. And it's about 15 minutes from the train station to the museum. We're also about 2 hours to 2.5 hours from the Boston area, depending on where you live in that area. So we're kind of halfway between Boston and New York. And we are within driving distance from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and all of New Jersey. So that's a huge demographic region in the northeast of the United States. And we do have people that drive hours to come to the museum and visit it, and they bring their parents and their grandparents and their children to experience, the Palestinian art and experience the first Palestinian museum in the Western Hemisphere. So there's also our website has a phone number and an email address for people who want to reach us, and my phone number is actually available to everybody. People can call me anytime they want to visit the museum or have any questions, and I'm on call 24 hours a day, basically, for at the service of people interested in the museum.
And I will post all of the details of a museum, obviously, on the podcast description. Nancy, I have a question for you. The exhibition in Venice opened last April 23rd, if I remember well, and it will close in November 27, to be more precise. I was wondering, what are your expectations?
My expectations have been met and exceeded at this point, for starters. There's an incredible amount of people seeing it. There was an incredible amount of publicity, newspapers, radio interviews, television interviews, all kinds of stuff. It's literally, people have told me that this is the talk of the town in Venice. So I'm ecstatic about that. We've had people visiting worldwide, including just about every country, that exists at this point. I've heard from a number of artists, very prominent artists internationally, who are very, very impressed with the work that we've done. What I'd like the artists who are featured in the exhibit to have their careers enhanced by being in that exhibit. And I'm doing everything I can to make connections for them with other people in the art world, which is definitely working at this point. Needless to say, I want to make sure that the museum is featured prominently, that people know about it, so that we can not only get people to the museum in Connecticut, but also have our museum feature exhibitions that we curate around the world, and that's happening as well. I can't talk about exactly which ones now, but they're definitely on the way. So we'd like to become a key player for Palestinian art on the international stage, I think. And since we've gotten here so fast, I don't think that that's inordinate at this point. Yeah.
I just wanted also to say to the listener, there's a YouTube video available with the opening ceremony of From Palestine with Art, and it is possible to take a quick peek at some of the works exhibited there, just watching the short video. I have one last question for both of you, since we reached the end of our conversation. Is there anything that I didn't ask or we didn't tackle, but that you feel like you want to talk about?
I think there's one question you didn't ask, and that is, what kind of help did we get? And we've gotten help from quite a number of individuals who've been very generous with their time. We've received donations from maybe about 10 people. Some of them are Palestinian, some of them aren't. We did not receive any help or any support from any organizations, any political entities, and any other institutions that exist either in Palestine or in the United States or Europe, etc. So the work that we produced and the effort that took place has been mostly internal to the Palestine Museum, funded 100% by Palestinian efforts internally. And we are still hoping that there's several months left that we may get additional help now that everybody knows about this and how successful it is. Needless to say, doing a 7-month exhibition in Venice during the Biennale is a very expensive proposition, and that runs into a lot of money, like they say. So we're hoping that some people will still join us in our history making and taking part in that. But from day one, I told Nancy that this project is going to go no matter. There's no question that it's going to go. The question that remains to be answered is who's going to be part of it, who's going to join us in making history, and there's still a few slots open for people to join us should they decide to.
Yes, I do want to just mention that the Connecticut Department of Humanities has given the museum, not the exhibition necessarily, but the museum a small grant that enabled us to go ahead. And they've recently told us that if we wanted to use that money toward the exhibition, that would be fine because they're pretty proud of what we're doing as a Connecticut institution.
These were Faisal Saleh, founder and director of Palestine Museum US, and Nancy Nesbitt, curator of the exhibition From Palestine with Arts, currently available at the Biennale of Venice from April 23rd to November 27. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what is...
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @Jerusalem Unplugged. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.